friends, and welcome to the Future of Gaming. You're listening to our weekly FOGcasts. We have the usual crew together again, finally. I know you've been waiting for this. We've got Philip Collins, Devin Becker, myself, Nico Vereecke. Today so the three of us got to hang out at GDC, and now we get to digest it a little bit. So Phil and I, we got a bit sick. Devin also got a bit sick, and so now we're back at it, and it gives us a chance to digest it mentally, and now we're going to talk it through together with you. So first, I guess we plan on discussing what happened to GDC, what we saw, what we liked, didn't like. I guess two other big news items that came out in that specific week, which is no coincidence, was the Polygon X Immutable announcement, getting married, big hype. And then we have CCP Games that raises $40 million from, among others, us at Bigcraft.
Inside job.
That's pretty much the plan for today, and then obviously we'll see where we end up. Phil, so you're feeling good? You told me your voice was bad, but
I'm getting there. My voice is 90% back, but as of last week, the words were not coming out. So it's good to be back in conversational again.
I like this type of Phil voice. It's a bit jazzy, a bit rough.
I'm the late night radio DJ.
Yeah, that's it. Good. All right. Let's dive in. So maybe Phil, like Devin, we spoke to Devin last week already. Phil, tell us, how was your GDC?
It was good. I mean, I think one of the great parts about GDC is always just catching up with industry people that are normally on a screen, like the two of you. So got to see Nico in person for, I think, the third time. And Devin and I finally met for the first time after many, many, many conversations here. So
wow.
That's always great. But overall, it was good. I think morale seemed relatively high, especially coming from the investor side when it seems like everyone's a little bit down right now. I think seeing the industry all in one place and seeing that there's just kind of constant innovation and excitement is always a positive thing for everyone involved. This year was definitely noticeably different on the Web3 side. I think that was partially self-selected because, Nico, Devin, and I are obviously talking to plenty of people in Web3, but I think that the tone of conversations has shifted just a little bit over the last year. And in general, the event was maybe buzzing a little bit less with Web3 hype and a little bit more with some AI hype and what that meant for the gaming industry as a whole, which isn't altogether expected, where GDC is always going to be a hotbed of emerging technology for gaming. So whatever's relevant is going to be discussed across the board. But yeah, all around good year. We can kind of dive into more of the types of conversations we were all three, I'm sure, having. But that was kind of one of the noticeable takeaways, is just trends have evolved and the conversations reflect that.
Would you say that your meetings were mostly like people you already knew, maybe even portfolio companies, or did you take a lot of like first calls?
Yeah, I think at GDC, it's a lot of finally meeting people in person that I've interacted with in the past. And, at those conferences, a lot of times it's meeting other investors and corporates in the gaming space more so than first startup conversations, which tend to happen either before or after the event. I think if you're late in a diligence process, it's a really good opportunity to meet some of those teams in person, but it's less first conversations with really anyone, to be honest.
So one more question. We have, we've been trying, or before COVID, we tried to physically meet at least once, all the founders that we would invest in, because it's very hard it's harder to hide, stuff that you're not saying physically when people are looking you in the eye versus through a screen. And so we see ourselves like moving back in that direction. Is that something like that you guys try to do as well?
Yeah, I individually try to meet with the founders that I work very closely with, but as a team, we also try to get just all of our founders together. GDC is a really convenient opportunity where everyone's already in one place because we're a gaming investor, and so pretty much all of the founders that we back are there in some capacity or for some duration. So definitely think that's really powerful. I feel like being a founder is an incredibly hard, stressful thing. And so having a cohort of peers that are going through something similar and have been through all these different stages is a really powerful thing. And it's also just great to sit down with founders and get get updates and talk about the future in person, because like you mentioned, it really is different than just sitting over a Zoom screen. I think it is a more, genuine conversation, and something I always appreciate.
Good. Devin?
I don't know.
How was your
I'm
GDC?
a little bit the opposite because I'm more of an introvert, even though I don't always come across that way. When I get into a good conversation, it doesn't seem like it. But, the main difference is generally that introverts are a bit more drained by the social stuff, energy-wise. So, I put a lot of energy into it, but I do find it a bit draining. And so for me, like, being behind a screen is a little bit easier because I get a little bit, it's easy, calls over, boom, I can recharge, right? I can go back to doing something silent, solo, put on some music, whatever. And so for me, like, GDC is a bit of a marathon. I think it's great, and I love getting to do it and see, like, a mix of people that I've seen before, but I don't see very often, and new people and meet people and whatnot, and get some FaceTime. But at the same time, like, if that was like all the time for me, I think I'd be like a blob at some point. I just couldn't take it. So I guess I'm a little opposite there, but I do, as you guys know, I live kind of in the computer anyways. So I'm already in the future in the metaverse, and so for me, it's the norm. But I have the eye tracking VR and stuff, so I can get to that point of looking people in the eyes, right, virtually. It'll be kind of the same. But I do get what you mean by, the relationship develops differently in person still. Like, even if you're normally doing everything through screens, getting an in-person thing tends to add a lot of subtle signals that improve, like, just relationship in general. And it does improve the conversation quality to some extent, right? Because there's, like, a lot of those little things. I mean, we can see each other's faces, but you miss out on all the body language, right? Like, you can maybe see my shoulders, but you can't see what my hands are doing half the time. It's just a lot of that subtle stuff gets lost, and I think eventually maybe we get there with like VR kind of stuff and other stuff, but until then I do anticipate people like yourselves will try and push back towards physical when we can, assuming we don't get another plague across the global again.
People like yourselves.
Yeah.
You dirty extroverts. Yeah, and also through a screen you can't know how tall Phil actually is.
Right. But we also don't get sick
people
from each other through a screen.
A lot of people are like, I thought you were shorter. And I was like, no, I'm presenting myself as short. So if you're watching this video, tell me if I'm presenting myself as short.
There's some people I thought were taller too that I got tricked by as well.
So Phil, you have a short head. I don't know what that means. But,
I don't know.
Yeah.
Hey, I hear that a lot. Do you ever get that, Nico? Ever?
Most people that tell me that I'm taller than. Well,
okay.
Yeah. I am taller than I look through a screen, I guess.
Okay. I'll be able to sleep tonight now. Thanks.
Yeah. Good. All right. Let's talk a bit about the big news. I would say, let's talk about the big one. It's probably the two most powerful business development machines in Web3 today. Decided to, who cares about competition? We're just going to join forces and make this a whole lot easier for ourselves. And so Immutable and Polygon have decided to partner up and work together. And I think, Devin, you'll probably do a better job summarizing what's happening. So I'll let you take it from here.
Yeah, I mean, it was really interesting. I spoke to a lot of people on both sides at GDC, really dug into the news and what it meant and the tech. And there's a lot of interesting details to it. But I think at the end of the day, I think both of them are, maybe a little sick of fighting. They both had something to offer each other. And, they're having to overspend on BD, constantly bringing games back and forth. Like the number of games that switched sides, was just getting ridiculous. And that had to involve money to some aspect, right? So they're starting to drain their funds over time, spending their money, bringing each other over. So at some point they go, you know what? Polygon, as Sandy put it, is an infrastructure company first. Whereas Immutable is a games company first. And so I think a little bit of a concession from Polygon's side to be like, you know what, we're going to do dApps as well. We don't need to do just games. You guys are basically just going to do games only. So why don't we just kind of split the difference? You guys can focus on the games a bit more than we do. We'll focus on the technology, and you can use our technology. And I think, as Sandeep put it, I think was like, we can't stop you from using it anyways because, it's out there. But, it's better as a partnership deal where they kind of support each other. Because one thing that's kind of not really paid attention to is actually value does accrue to Polygon in this. Because what happens is, even though Immutable's token now has more value because it's going to be used as gas on the network.
Devin, you need to give the context first and how it's going to work from a technical point of view.
Everyone knows the news right now, right? No, but basically the idea is Polygon's ZK EVM technology, the zero knowledge EVM or Ethereum virtual machine technology, will be used for a new chain that Immutable will be running, in addition to Polygon also having released their own ZK EVM chain using their technology as well. On the 27th, about 6-7 days ago from when we're recording this, and so like it's the next level technology in the sense of everyone knows the zero knowledge stuff like speeds everything up. We've mentioned it quite a few times, but Immutable was just ZK without the EVM, so you couldn't have smart contracts on the network, which was kind of a big deal, right? Like you could pretty much do NFT trading stuff and you had the zero gas fees and it was really cool, but you couldn't really run a lot of stuff on chain. And I think sometimes that was a blocker for devs, especially if they wanted to build on chain. You just couldn't, right? You had to build off. So
can I give some context there? Because I think it's interesting, right? So Immutable was and actually still is using the technology StarkX from the company called Starkware. Israelis that are, I would say, pioneers when it comes to ZK technology, zero knowledge technology. And so StarkX was their bespoke solution, their bespoke rollup solution. That was, as you mentioned, it was, I think the correct term might be just not Turing complete. So you could barely program it. You can do everything you wanted with it. There was a promise of StarkNet. Man, these terms. Anyway, so StarkNet was going to be like a rollup, like a ZK rollup, I think validity. Anyway, rollup that was like you could program on there, and you'd be using the Cairo language. But I think one of the reasons why Immutable decided to not work with Starkware anymore and build on StarkNet is because Starkware has been slow on deploying StarkNet.
Right.
So we've talked to founders that more than a year ago now we're going to build on StarkNet's mainnet, and it's still not where it was supposed to be. Like it's a year off or something.
Yeah.
Anyway,
whereas the ZK EVM from Polygon had been on testnet since October. So they'd been able to prove that out, I think, a bit more. As you said, like if they're being slow and Polygon's got their stuff going and it's like a chance to tie the knot between the two competitors, like form sort of a truce. That does seem like a good match.
I agree. And one more thing here that I think is interesting is that, and so I'm not super technical, so I don't know the intricacies here. No, that's not the word. Anyway, you know what I mean. It's early. As far as I understand, so Cairo is a language that's specifically designed to be used in zero knowledge roll-up technology. What the ZK EVM does, and so Cairo is not EVM compatible, which means that you can't copy-paste essentially your code from a Solidity-based smart contract and reuse it for StarkNet. For ZK EVM, that is the case. And so what the ZK EVM does is it turns EVM code into something that's compatible with zero-knowledge technology. As far as I understand, this might be a similar case to what we saw with the internet, where suboptimal protocols are being used, because of random reasons, which in this case is, there's a lot of stuff on Web3 that's been built in EVM compatible code. And so, we might be using suboptimal programming languages to merge those into the new technologies that are going to speed things up. Because
like
as far as I understand, Cairo is specifically built for these, for this ZK tech, and it is more efficient and better, and you could do more stuff with it than if you would try to do the same with an EVM compatible language. Anyway, that was something I found interesting.
Yeah, I think the ability that compatibility is a bigger deal than people want to give credit for, because the idea is if you've already been developing your game for say like half a year or more, and you were like, hey, I'm looking for the best blockchain to be going to, and both Polygon and Immutable can go, hey, just bring your EVM stuff over here. Like that's a pretty big deal because that's a big upgrade, right? It's like when everyone was developing for Ethereum, right, at first, and Ethereum started to kind of really have problems, and then people saw Polygon as an option because it was EVM compatible on a layer 2 but ran better. People moved to it. That was a big advantage Polygon had. Now this is a big advantage they have again to move towards this ZK EVM technology. And so it allows you to, if you're already developing a game or you already have developed a game, to be able to migrate that to something that's more efficient and more scalable. But the big difference here is for Immutable side, it's not gas free. So that is a big difference that anyone moving over from, say, Immutable to trying to move over to this will have to deal with, is because you have to pay something to get people to run your smart contracts, right? And so to do so, you have to pay gas. Now, like, because they didn't require smart contract stuff before on the Immutable Stark tech, you didn't really have to pay gas fees. I mean, I think there was maybe some sort of subsidization. I'm not sure how the financial stuff worked there, but that is a big difference, as you'll have to consider if you go to migrate to this. Okay, well, you have to pay gas, right? And this, as I was kind of like going to before we went more into the details of context, but is that IMX will now finally have some utility. The Immutable token, which had basically no utility before, is now going to be basically what Matic is to Polygon. It's going to be the gas. But the big coup here for Polygon is that in order to stake for the validators for the nodes, you will still have to use Matic. So there will still be actually value add for Matic. So Polygon does benefit from this as well, from supporting this. And that's where, like, I think that part of the story tends to get buried a bit. Like, people don't really catch that aspect, that Polygon benefits from this too in that respect. Because Matic then becomes this broader token like Ethereum is, where it's not just this isolated thing anymore. Now it's starting to expand out in the importance of it. And I mean, I don't think that's going to make Matic like money or something all of a sudden, but it is a big deal to expand that out. I mean, for the same reason IMX having some utility matters now, because it's not just a token for GameStop to dump. It actually has something else you could do with it.
Mm-hmm. So as far as I understand, there's like 3 different layers here. So yeah. if you want to work with Immutable, you can still do that in the old way, which is use Immutable X, which is going to remain based on Starkware technology. And I think that's going to be, as you mentioned, Devin, gasless, and using that bespoke rollup solution. You can also build on the Immutable ZK EVM, and that's what you just mentioned, where you will be paying gas in the Immutable token, and there will still be some need for Matic, which is what you use to stake for the validators. And then you could also, and then we're going into the next layer, which is you can also work with Immutable to get your own bespoke ZK EVM rollup. And that will be, as far as I understand, so using the Polygon technology, but if I'm not mistaken, that would be then validated with Immutable tokens. So we're going like a layer deeper. I might be wrong though. Is it also Matic?
I think I read that as when it was Polygon announcing. I think I read it as Matic would still be needed for that.
Okay, then I'm wrong. Okay, in that case,
I mean, then could be wrong. But.
Yeah. I know. I think you might be right. Because it's still using Polygon technology, you need Matic to stake, but you don't need Immutable to pay for gas. You can choose your own. You can choose which token will be used to pay for gas.
Kind of like an Avalanche subnet, right?
Yes, exactly. And so I think the way I heard Robbie, who's I think the president of Immutable, one of the co-founders, explain it, was that they want to be able to help. On one hand, the Activision Blizzards and the rights of this world, and on the other hand, the indie developers. And so, if Activision wants to make their own Warzone rollup, highly recommended. Then that would be something that they could do. And if a small indie developer just wants to have the simplest, easiest solution and just allow their players to trade their assets and have the good old real ownership, that would be possible as well. Good. Now that we've given context, Phil, Devin and I have been ranting for a while. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I mean, it was interesting to see this because I think a lot of past episodes we've talked about the different strategies that both of these groups are taking. And to Devin's point around Polygon maybe being much broader than gaming and Immutable being more gaming focused, or at least focused on the actual games themselves, they've taken 2 opposite strategies within gaming, where Polygon's taken the volume play and Immutable's tried to take the value play of smaller numbers but more curated, and Polygon's like, we just want everyone to be building here. And so the merging of those 2 strategies is now interesting to see. I don't, to be honest, fully understand how this is going to shake these guys up on a technical level, but it is interesting to see some bridges being built between probably 2 of the fiercest competitors within the gaming infrastructure space for Web3. We've talked a lot in the past about how competition has been different in Web3 up to this point, and people are a lot more collaborative than they normally would be in business, where a competitor is a competitor, and you don't like to give each other advantages. But I'll be curious to see how the implementation or the crossover here actually does mutually benefit both, or if one of them is going to be able to edge the other one out over time to the point around like Matic still being needed even on immutable transactions. So I don't have too hot of a take on how this is going to play out. I think it was a little bit of a surprising fuse, but it also feels like layer twos are kind of banded together and fighting the layer ones and trying to prove out their scalability. So maybe it's just like perceived deficiency in that space driving them together to try to be, their aggregate value is that of a layer one. So I'm not sure beyond that.
They both said that they believe highly in Ethereum being kind of the base layer. And so I think this kind of helps double down on that, expands that out to help compete more and more, as you said, Phil, with like the layer one. So this is like a big blow in a way, the way I see it, against Solana and Avalanche and stuff like that, because now it's just like there's four chains to choose from, like as layer twos there, right? You've got the POS Polygon, you got the ZK AVM Polygon, you've got the Starkware Immutable, and you've got the Polygon ZK EVM Immutable. And so it's like you've got four choices now as those layer twos, not to mention all the other roll-up styles and stuff like that to go with like Arbitrum and Optimism. So it starts to make the case against rival layer ones pretty heavy, because one thing that Robbie was going on a lot about that I thought was, I think, important was liquidity within the whole ecosystem and driving that liquidity. And it's something I've seen a lot of problem with people building their own chains, is you kind of build yourself on this little island. And I'm not the biggest fan of everything being bridges and stuff like that. And we've seen the security problems that come from that. And bridges are kind of this weird hack more than they are really an actual transfer technology. They're like, let's lock something up here and spawn it over here, and it's more like remittance than it is an actual like tech in a way. And so it just feels like a hack or a kludge having these sort of systems. I mean, still you're kind of bridging in a way between layers, but you're doing it in a way that's using the layers further down to secure that rather than just to teleport it. And I think this is probably the better way forward to build these layer twos on here. But I mean, we'll see, right? It just heightens the competition, I think, in the space. And now maybe Polygon and Immutable can focus a bit more on building that up rather than just on poaching from each other, and spend hopefully a little more wisely. But that being said, that hasn't stopped Polygon from announcing, for example, here's some games that are coming to the ZK EVM that we're doing, and then Immutable also doing the same. Which the funniest one to me was why am I forgetting the mech game all of a sudden? Metalcore, yeah. I don't know why I blanked on the name. I just started with the name. It's gone from Immutable to Polygon and now back to Immutable, but on the ZK EVM. So it's like that was like the penultimate poaching back and forth that's happened with this. And of course, even the Metalcore was in like their keynote address and stuff like that, showing it off. So I think that's a good example of like this fighting, hopefully, kind of winding down in a way, so they could spend a little more wisely. But Polygon still announcing stuff on their ZK AVM shows that they're not like completely shying away from games. They're just like, okay, well, let's make our deals a little more smart and not waste all of our BD money just on heightening the negotiating bribes.
Feels like there's very few reasons left for developers not to go build, on, Immutable / Polygon, right? I guess, the only reason that's left for me is, well, one, potentially like the treasuries and the war chests of some of the competing L1s that, would be willing to pay you money to come build on them. And then I guess the other potential reason would be that, like, for example, the Move language or, Solana are more, from a technical perspective, aligned or similar to, I think, the Unreal language, which makes it easier for your traditional Unreal Engine backend developers to actually make the switch and start programming smart contracts. That's as far as I understand it. But I would say that, that argument becomes weaker and weaker as we see, I think, network effects increase within the blockchain space and on chains. And so, if 99% of gamers are, on let's say the broader Ethereum ecosystem, and you have your little marketplace on Solana, and there's no one there, then I think for new developers it's gonna be an easy choice.
Yeah, especially with the Unity plugin probably leading the way to an Unreal plugin at some point, as Immutable said they were working on that as well. So then that, as you said, that kind of gap starts to shrink, and you start to go, well, like it's easy for me to just use this because it's already got a plugin for what I use.
Yeah, I think especially when we're talking about open source technology, the easiness from a technical point of view to build things, I feel like that as an edge and as a competitive advantage probably gets eroded away, right? Because more and more plugins / solutions / service providers even start emerging to make the difficulty of integration or making the switch easier for you. And so I think that's more fundamental network effects start winning out in terms of competitive advantage. And then I'm talking about player liquidity, financial liquidity, and yeah, I guess for us, and I think, Phil, for you, this is probably also important. I know you don't really invest in content, but if you do, I guess that's one of the questions you're asking yourself is how are you going to get to your audience? Like, what's your go-to-markets?
Right.
What's your distribution edge? So,
Yep.
Good. All right. On to the next piece of news, I would say, which is a few months ago, we had the chance to speak to Hilmar Veigar Pettersson, who is a famous dude. He's a really cool dude. He's also a really tall dude, by the way, who is the CEO of CCP Games, who are the makers of EVE Online. And they, during the week of GDC, announced that they've just raised a nice round, $40 million, to build a game, a AAA style game on the blockchain. And in my head, I have a bunch of ways that Web3 helps games, or how Web3 technologies can enhance games. And one of those is build a very big open economy MMO, something that I think a lot of teams are trying. I think it will be very hard. But yeah, EVE Online is known for its extremely deep player-driven economy. It's also known for having a sort of gray, like a big secondary market, a gray market and so it's essentially already semi-open. And I've specifically discussed that with Hilmar, and he told me, like, the only difference between our game, not the new game, but EVE Online, and a blockchain-based game is that the terms of service state that you can't do shit, but essentially those are getting violated the whole time. So it's essentially also an open game, which I'm not sure if I fully agree with that. But they've said, we see the potential here, and we're now going to build our own game.
Yeah, that'll make for some fun corporate espionage if it's anything like EVE, right? Keep in mind, of course, they didn't say it was going to be EVE. They just said the EVE universe, right? Which is pretty vague. Yeah. Like, they've built a lot of games already in the EVE universe, and so that doesn't necessarily say it's something, a true extension of the normal gameplay. It may be something totally different. It might just be an economy simulator that doesn't have any gameplay for all we know. Like, they've got Excel integrated now, so it's. But as we've said, like, many times, we've referenced them tons of times, because, like, there's only a few games that are really big part of examples of economy design, like, on a big scale. And EVE is definitely one of them, and actually has economists on staff. Like, they may not always know what they're doing, but they know what they're doing more than a lot of other game companies. And that's a big advantage, I think, coming into the Web3 space, because I think they're one of the few companies that probably doesn't benefit as much from hiring a consultant, although it depends on how much they've been paying attention to the Web3 tech and seeing, like, what works there and what doesn't. But I think they're not the kind of company that's just going to bring over DeFi stuff and screw it up like a lot of these other companies that just kind of jump into the space. Like, but I do wonder what the time scale's like on this. Like, they announced it, but it's, how many years off is this? This could be, 5 years from now before we see anything, if it even gets finished, right? Like, they've definitely had their share of games that haven't gone the places they were, anticipating them to go, or been maybe a little disappointing, or eventually get canceled. It's tricky, but I don't know if were you involved at all in this, Nico, with Bitcraft being part of it?
Yeah. So we're being part of that round, and I don't know how much you can share, but it's going to be less than 5 years.
Cool.
Yeah. So we've actually, there was an internal playtest already, so I've played something.
So like the question then I have is like, are you pretty excited or?
I'm pretty excited, right? I never played Eve, and at this point I'm just too intimidated, and so this gives me sort of and I guess more people also a fresh start.
Yeah. Yeah, I think what's exciting about this, and I have no stake here, so this is not a biased opinion. But what's really interesting about Hilmar and that team coming in are again highly credible games team, games first team coming in and building a pretty ambitious vision in the blockchain space, which I always appreciate. I think we're at the point now where I'd rather see people take the time to build out a big vision that has the chance for adoption versus trying to rush things out to market, which I think was a very 2021 mindset. What's really compelling about that team, and something that I talked a lot about with several of the investors at GDC that participated in the round, is that this team's kind of years ahead of most of the competition because they've already had a lot of the challenges that I think Web3 brings to game development. And while I think a lot of the first-time teams in this space still have a lot of failure to do to figure things out and ultimately come out on the other side, it feels like given the parallels that Eve has to what we've always thought of as Web3 gaming, they've already kind of failed forward and figured a lot of this out, and so they're starting at a pretty intense advantage over other players that I think could eventually figure it out, but just haven't struggled with it or like really grappled with it yet with a real live game. And so I think there's going to be a lot of lessons from Eve that they're able to take in here and be ahead of where most people that are playing in the space are going to
Hopefully
land.
most people can look at Eve, being a public game and learn from it. Obviously, it's been referenced a lot by like people like Edward Castronova, who's done a lot on virtual economies and stuff like that, and actually been speaking even kind of in the Web3 space lately with some partnerships, with machinations and stuff like that. I think he had a talk at GDC actually, but it's there's stuff people can look at right now, and even that's why we bring it up and mention it, and that's why it seemed like a good fit. But it's like, well, it's probably not a totally open book, right? Like a lot of those lessons probably have to come from like GDC talks and stuff where they kind of open up. There's still a lot people can learn by just looking at the evolution of the game as it is, right? Like if you go back historically, look at the stuff they've done, you could tell probably some of those things are reactionary to things that they've learned, like try and anticipate, work backwards a little bit. But at the end of the day, I think there's a lot of people that just don't have the time to do that and just kind of jump to easy answers. But I am kind of curious if this is going to take some of the wind out of Star Atlas's solar sails, because that was like a big anticipated space nerd thing that was going to be block Web3 blockchain, unlike Star Citizen. And now all of a sudden, you're going to have like 3 space games that are all like heavily economy driven, but 2 of them on blockchain, 1 of them not. Assuming Star Citizen doesn't pivot to being Web3 just so they can sell NFTs now, but we'll see.
But I think to the point before about Hilmar and this team, I think they're going to be able to avoid a lot of the pitfalls that we've seen with Star Atlas. I'm still confused as to what's happening with Star Atlas and
showrooms.
It seems like first time building in this space can be 1 step forward, 2 steps back kind of thing. And I feel like that's what I keep hearing with Star Atlas is that's exactly what's happening, where there's this huge ambitious vision and it's like, take a step, 2 back, and eventually you're just like, you're still 5 years out from launch after multiple years of building it. So it feels like those are some of the steps or the pitfalls that this team will hopefully be able to avoid. And so it'll be interesting to see how the timing lines up and how the quality of what's promised versus what's delivered actually shakes out as.
It's unfortunate we probably won't get like a public white paper from CCP. I'm not a big fan of like releasing game design documents that early essentially anyways, because I think you overpromise and trying to deliver on that kind of sucks. But if Nico's saying, it's actually farther along than maybe we know, then hopefully we get some more information. Like I doubt they're going to get like super, super detailed, but I think the sooner we can see stuff, like the better for everyone like in Web3 space to potentially learn from. If there's some cool design stuff shared, some ideas, obviously, the CCP probably doesn't want people sniping their ideas, but at the same time, like if it's not really a competition, like it's a different genre game, like CCP, like they have their audience. Like that audience doesn't always overlap with anything else sometimes. Like they have their very niche audience, so they don't have to be as, I think, competitively protective of that, right? Because people who like this kind of game, and everyone else can go play something else. And so, assuming they're going for a similar audience and not trying to overly broaden out to like casual gaming or something, then I think it's an opportunity for them to like, maybe kind of help educate the Web3 space if they could put out some stuff early rather than wait, a few years from now when they're like the game's out. So hopefully we get a little bit more on that, and maybe Nico, you could push them a little bit to at least drop some teasers on us. We can speculate indefinitely.
Wait, did you want me to push them to build a casual game? Is that
No, definitely
what I
not
should take
that.
away from?
There's enough casual space games at this point, I think, 4X ones and whatnot.
So to your question about, how does this make you feel about Star Atlas specifically? I think I've said this before, but I think that a lot of teams underestimate the complexity of turning a game economy that you used to have complete control over into an open economy, blockchain based, where you will suddenly have essential like bounties, and where suddenly everyone will do everything they can to actually extract as much value as they can. And so this is why I think I am pretty positive about the chances of CCP in figuring this out, because, like as we said before, they basically already have a semi-open economy, and so they have a lot of the lessons that need to be learned and that will be learned by a lot of these blockchain gaming companies. They have learned those already, and so I think if you would bet on one open world economy to be sustainable and fun, I think that's what's like theirs probably has the highest shot at that. And just to hammer in this point, I had a conversation with Chris Clay, who's ex Magic the Gathering Arena, so he built out that game, and who went to work on Gods Unchained, which was Immutable's first game. It's a blockchain based TCG, and TCGs make so much sense on the blockchain, right? A physical TCG already has this sense of, you buy cards and you own the cards and you can do with these cards whatever you want, right? And so it makes a ton of sense to just take that and put it on a blockchain, which is why we're seeing like so many TCGs come out and already exist. And he told me that building it on the blockchain makes things so much harder for him already, and it already makes so much sense. And so, I think a lot of teams underestimate the complexity of putting this into an open economy and all of the bad actors in the space, all of the scamming, all of the botting that will be a result of that.
I think a valuable lesson from EVE itself is that open doesn't have to mean truly open in the sense of like just opening the door to everything and just being like, cool, everyone can do whatever they want. Plex is a good example of like having a sort of choke point or constraint, right? So like you could sort of get money in and out in a way through Plex in the game, but it's not like a straight financial fiat to a virtual currency transaction, right? It's a kind of a way in and out, but like it's not exactly the same. And I think there are ways to do that in Web3 where you go, this is open in this channel here. This is open in this channel. This is open in this conversion here. And not everything has to just be like straight up open on the chain. Obviously, there's different degrees of that, right? But I think that's something I try and impress on a lot of people that I'm consulting with, is that there are varying degrees of openness. There are varying ways of approaching, say, an NFT or a token that aren't just following the standards. They could be enhancing the standards. They could be closing off parts of the standards. Like we have like the sort of the philosophical Web3, and then there's the practical Web3. And I think those two have overlap, but they don't have to be exactly the same. And I think it's worth always considering what your objectives are and what makes sense to do. And hopefully not from like a greedy corporate standpoint, but more of a let's protect the players from things that make like that would be bad for this experience, but also open it up to the potential for more positive experiences by enabling certain things, right? And you got to kind of pick and choose that. And obviously, CCP is a little more experienced at that, because they've done, dabbled in that direction. They have like elements of it that are sort of open on the gray market in a way that aren't maybe legit, but they've seen what happens with those. And I think in general, like MMO kind of stuff is going to kind of trend this direction once it kind of can figure out certain ways of doing it. And we already have like examples of that to some extent with like games like Mir M, or Mir 4, which are kind of the same game-ish, but both have like a CCP-ish kind of idea of mining being a for a resource that could be like important to the game and stuff like that. So it's kind of funny that you have the same kind of idea of miners and bots and that sort of thing. And it's an MMO kind of thing, sort of MMO ARPG, sort of between the two, but that idea of there are games already kind of trying to go that direction. And I think Asian markets are definitely going to go that direction. We're going to see probably a lot more, ARPG or MMO or whatever style open economy games coming out of that market, that I think it'll be worth looking at that as well for different ideas on how you can do it. Because they try and come up with different ideas and different approaches. Some work better than others. But the big one that they've had a problem with, I think, which we still haven't really solved in Web3, is like the bots kind of problem, and dealing with like the problems that, Axie started with scale of earnings being an issue, and any kind of reward system. Even when they move to like competitive, it still has scale issues, and like that's something we haven't really solved in this space yet.
I had a conversation with Hilmar specifically about this. I asked him, like, how do you handle bots in EVE Online, and how much do you think they're a problem in a blockchain based game? And as like he keeps saying that EVE Online, like, there's little difference between the economy of EVE Online and the economy of a blockchain based game, because it's already being violated, it's already gray. So and what he said was that there's it's really hard, but there's like dozens of different things you can do to start countering botting, like the gamified captcha and these types of things, and bots are really good at like simple tasks, but are really bad at like more advanced tasks of cooperation, that kind of stuff. Anyway, let's see. I think I've been looking at other solutions to this specific problem. Looking at some companies doing something there. And I think specifically using the blockchain. So I think the blockchain is going to be fundamental in solving the problem of botting. And on the other hand, it's also one of the main reasons why botting is becoming more of a problem, ironically. Anyway, so both occurs in a blessing for that part. Talking about the complexities of putting games on a blockchain, and CCP being good at that. So I was watching Robbie, so the president of Immutable, talk about the partnership, and one of the things that he said is that their ultimate goal is to give every player ownership over their in-game assets, all of their in-game assets. And so I want to pull this conversation a bit in the philosophical direction, and wonder, what is your thought on that? Is giving every player full ownership of their assets a good thing? And when I say full ownership, means that they can sell it, they can burn it, they can do everything they want with it. Phil, what's your thought?
Most of me wants to say that it is a good thing. I think that there's kind of this like arbitrary scarcity that we've seen in video game assets in general in the past, that being able to buy, sell, trade makes a lot of sense for digital assets, just as it does for physical assets, especially if you're going to put an element of scarcity. I know plenty of games play the volume game, where they're going to take their 100% cut of primary sales and price it accordingly and assume that they're going to come out on top. I think the part that honestly maybe concerns me about enabling people to fully own is just the over financialization of these games, where not every game needs to have this ownership mechanic, right? Like, I think it can make sense in certain areas where, like in a trading card game, to your point earlier, the secondary market is almost part of the strategy, right? I think that's part of the meta game to somehow increase the value of your deck or your inventory at the best possible price. Like that is almost part of the game. That doesn't necessarily need to apply to everything, especially as you go down the scale towards more casual styles of games. Not everything needs to be ownable. And I think that's something that the hyper casual genre is going to struggle with as they go down this road to offset their advertising issues. But I think that in my mind, it's almost genre based, where there are certain realms where it makes sense, like a TCG or maybe an MMORPG, but not every genre is suited to having this financialization, tradability embedded within their their game economy, because not every game has to have a full blown economy. Not every game needs to be Eve. So that's where I struggle to just generalize it as like, yes, everyone needs to own everything.
I think it's important, especially if we're going to invoke the comparison to TCGs, to separate the difference between paying for stuff in games and free to play, because I think that's a big point of contention with giving ownership of stuff doesn't work well in free to play in a lot of aspects, right? Because you end up with economy inflation problems, you end up with lots of other issues, and that's part of the reason why open economy stuff has gone away to some extent prior to Web3, is because just the problems you get with the fact that you need to give away a lot of things for free in order to get people to play your game, and so that becomes like a big point of contention. Whereas a TCG is all paid. You pay for everything in it. You pay for all the cards, you pay for the deck box, whatever. Everything in it you own because you paid for it. You're not given it by the game, right? Like, they can run tournaments where you can win stuff in there with that's mostly promotional stuff, but that's a tournament and not, that's an esports thing and in a way, and not a part of the game itself. And so I think it's important to recognize, like, if we are selling everything to the player and players are financially already embedded in the game in that sense of like buying everything, then it doesn't make sense to give them ownership. It's like the same reason, like if I buy, a song off iTunes, I should be able to like actually own that song, right? Rather than just license it. And so I think that's where we need to draw the line. Is like, if people are paying for something directly, that's where we should give it to them. Like, if we're giving them stuff for free, then and I notice a lot of Web3 games have gone kind of this direction, right? Where you have the idea of there's the NFT versions of things, and then to allow the free-to-play players to play, they get a non-tradable version of that, that free thing that maybe has reduced benefits. And I think that's where we're going to kind of see the line of distinction is like, we want people to be able to play our game without having to spend money to get them on board. But the idea of opening up everything needs to be just opening to everything that they paid for and not opening everything that we gave them. And I think if we stick to that, it becomes a lot more tenable, because we're like, oh, you bought it, you own it. Like, it's simple. Like, and then you could trade it, whatever. You're probably not going to get your money back. Like, in terms of like the whole amount, you're going to get less, because maybe it's not a used good in the sense of like wear and tear, but it's still secondary market good, and prices are expected to be below, primary market prices, like just in general, right? And so that then is okay. We start to get into weird royalty issues and other stuff we've touched on before, but I think, to me, that's kind of the dividing line that I think is important to consider, especially looking back at TCGs.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Devin, you were just finishing up your thought, but it is also interesting to think about the ownability of assets at both the game level, like the game license level, versus in-game assets level, because we've seen a lot of people try to take this as in the startup world, trying to apply this to game licenses, and I think that's like a jumping off point that just seems even further away than the ownability of in-game assets, where it's like, why would a publisher, when they don't have to sell physical copies anymore, want to enable people to play their game for cheaper, instead of just having the upfront primary sale be $60 for at least a boxed premium product, which I know is irrelevant to free to play and whatnot, but that logic almost like falls off there, and so I don't know exactly how that plays out, but I've noticed that people have kind of tried to go at both, and the in-game assets seem to be a much more compelling proposition for developers than a premium product being sold on the secondary market, when digitally there's no marginal cost for really an additional sale.
Right. I mean, there's two trends in Web3 that I think could be interesting, just jumping off points to go into kind of different ways of thinking about the ownership issue. One is the procedural content stuff. So when we talk about like IP licensing, like I think it's interesting, like what Yuga Labs did with the monkeys, right? If you own it, you can use it. You can use the IP, right? And that became really interesting. You got people like Seth Green fighting over trying to use his monkey for his it was a show or a movie, and like just that idea that like if it's procedurally generated, everyone's is unique. Therefore, you're not infringing on the IP the same way, right? Like where it's like your version is unique, like but your NFT is also a license, right, for that particular one, and that's ownership in that sense, that like as long as you hold it, you have ownership of that particular piece of IP. And I think that's a really interesting idea that could be explored further, because of procedural stuff that we just had never really done much before. And I think that bleeds into kind of the UGC stuff, which is the other area that's kind of interesting, where, the game is acting more as a platform and making money from that in some way, rather than making money from the assets. And you like that you own the assets that you make within the game, similar to the idea of owning the assets that, are procedurally generated. And looking at it that way of like player involvement or player personalization as angles towards ownership rather than owning like a corporate asset, like owning something that's an IP of a bigger organism essentially, and then the game developers providing other things. They're providing maybe content in different ways, or they're providing a platform, they're providing technology, providing different aspects right there as a service rather than as a like content IP sort of thing. And obviously there's lots of different directions to go with that, and we see a lot of people experimenting in this space, which I think is cool. I think we're kind of like early still in that before people figure that like out exactly the business models, but I do think there's opportunity there to look at like how do we expand ownership into a more IP friendly direction instead of it just being like this really contentious thing about licensing all the time.
Good. All right. Thank you both. Listener, thank you for listening. If you enjoyed, feel free to let us know if you learned something. Thank you, everyone. And speak to you next week. Ciao.